Kia ora. Mamua ka kite a muri. Ma muri kia ora a mua. Those who lead give sight to those who follow. Those who follow give life to those who lead. Kia ora koutou, and welcome to the 5th of our Leading for Wellbeing webinar series. That whakatau speaks to the importance of working together, and it acknowledges and values the importance of both the leader and the followers, who are both essential and codependent. Welcome, I'm Fiona McCarthy. I'm the Director of HR at Waitematā DHB and Chair of Ka Hui Oranga, and thank you so much for joining us today. Ka Hui Oranga is a national collaborative group made up of members of the District Health Boards, our unions, the Ministry of Health, the New Zealand Blood Service and the Mental Health Foundation. As a group, we are committed to employee wellbeing in the health sector, and we've worked together to produce this webinar series. Through this series of webinars, we want to speak with you about wellbeing, offer some food for thought, and after the webinar is finished, to post on the DHB-owned website Wellbeing for Health some resources which may assist growing your confidence and ability to lead for wellbeing. Today we're going to be exploring the intentionally bringing together compassion to our leadership to support wellbeing in our staff and in our communities. I'd just like to encourage people that if they would like to post a question, just to use the Q&A function that's just at the bottom of your screen. I'm really privileged today to be joined by 3 of my colleagues, Kerri Nuku, Grace Ryu, and Dr Andy Simpson. Kerri, would you like to introduce yourself?
Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou katoa, tēnei rā, kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. Ko waio, ko Kerri Nuku tōku wingawa, he kai whakahaere for the New Zealand Nurses Organisation. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Grace, would you like to introduce yourself?
Kia ora everyone, I'm Grace Ryu, the Operations Manager of Asian Health Services at Waitematā DHB. I'm also a member of Ka Hui Oranga.
Kia ora, Grace. And Andy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Tēnā koutou katoa. Hi, I'm Andy Simpson. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at the Ministry of Health.
Thank you. As leaders, we recognise the importance of great teamwork. And in these uncertain times where normal things that ground and guide us are not really available or don't seem to be the right fit, what can we do? We've heard before in previous webinars about social and economic changes, and they really have impacted us all quite differently. And what we face at work and at home varies hugely from person to person and whānau to whānau. In another webinar, we heard about psychological safety and the value of creating an environment where people feel safe to be their authentic selves and where teams are comfortable to talk about the hard things. But what value does a focus on compassionate leadership give us, and how does it connect with the very heart of the people that work in the healthcare system? Let's start with understanding a wee bit about what is important to our leaders who serve our healthcare workforces and support the wellbeing of our people. And I'm interested in hearing from you, Kerri, how the value of compassion has become important in your leadership in these uncertain times.
Thanks, Fiona. I guess this has taken a long time to reflect on it, because I guess when you're in the midst of uncertain times, you just seem to get on, roll your sleeves up and get on with it. But we're in the middle of the most uncertain times globally. I think COVID-19 has been invisible to the naked eye, but certainly powerful in its presence. And what it has done is nobody's future is certain. I guess that we can say that. And so what it has done, and I've had to draw on personally my own inner strengths around tika pono and aroha, so how I approach anything that is particularly uncertain or even certain, is about, first of all, understanding me, how I work, doing things the right way, truthfulness and honesty. And I think with aroha, or compassion, which is generosity and spirit, I think during COVID-19, what we saw is communities, nurses work together, each with a common interest to protect and show the compassion. So I guess for me, it is about having some inner confidence that we may not know the certain road ahead, but how we get there requires us to be steadfast and good listeners. I don't know, during COVID-19, I had the privilege of working alongside nurses and hearing the concerns of nurses. And I think that's what drove me to be the better advocate, is because once you connect with somebody's heart and soul, then it's something that you can never forget. So the compassion to move forward and be a better advocate was drawn purely by the generosity of those nurses who I was privileged to have share their stories with, which then motivated me to do something more proactive. So compassionate leadership is about being truthful with yourself, being present in the moment with others, and doing what you need to do to path or to explore the journey forward.
Kia ora, Kerri. And I think from what you've said, connecting with the heart and soul is actually incredibly important, particularly when you're listening to your folk and you're also responding to their needs. And I'm just wondering, picking up on that, Andy, if you can just speak about how you've found that you can keep your leadership focus when you're responding to the needs of the healthcare workforce.
Thanks, Fiona. I agree with Kerri. It's a very complex world we're living in, and you know, every day we've got an evolving situation. You know, no 2 days are the same, and things can change rapidly overnight. We've got evolving expertise as we get to grips with the way that we've dealt things and learning from that. And we've got an evolving evidence base about what's happening overseas as well. So in that changing context, what's important for everyone changes rapidly. And I think the most important thing for me is actually hearing from people what is important, why is it important, how have things changed from the past, you know, the previous views. And so for me, it's incredibly important that we actually have our forums where we're actually meeting up with people, whether it's through our existing professional forum groups, whether it's through recreating groups, whether it's through communication pathways, whether it's people accessing us through the colleges or even just direct approaches. All of these are really incredibly important ways for us to hear what's the signal that is changing, what is most important for people in front of them today compared to yesterday, and how is that going to change tomorrow. And we keep focusing on that, it actually gives us a paradigm about what we need to be addressing. And I think it speaks to compassionate leadership, and it's very much around that listening and understanding the context that people are in at this time.
Thanks for that. You talk about evolving needs and listening. How do you enable people to not only speak about what their needs are, but move them kind of, you know, to where they're able to either resolve and or discuss what their needs are?
That's an interesting question. I suppose it depends on what the need is. You know, sometimes it can be as simple as just hearing yourself talk the situation through, and when you hear yourself talk it, where you're bouncing ideas, we're doing peer review. It can be as simple as that. But other times it can be there is something that needs to change, and actually, how do you identify what needs to change? What is the context around that? Where do you need to take the conversation? And you know, whether it's through a DHB, whether it's through a PHO, whether it's through the ministry, I think the first thing again is getting that transparency and the understanding. So it's really creating the forum for the conversations to happen.
Mm. And I guess in a way, it also means that through evolving through the conversation can often be what the next steps are, or in fact how you need to tackle something, because we don't always have the answers.
No, look, and I think that's true of the world at the moment. When you look at it, I don't think anyone had the answers in March. I think we're learning more and more. I think we've got a lot more to learn as well. So I think it's, as well as what we know now and how to respond now with what we know, we need to remain agile as well, because what we think's right now might not be what we think's right the not too distant future. And how do we adapt and change? But the only way we can do that is we've just got to keep that open focus around what are we hearing, what are the pressure points, what are people putting on the table, and how do we respond to that?
Thanks, Andy. Grace, just thinking about what we've been talking about, how have you done different things in your leadership of your team over the last few months?
Yeah, I would like to share some experiences we had during the first wave of COVID-19 early this year. As you know, some people who are COVID-19 positive and some members of our community faced significant challenges due to internet bullying and discrimination. And also our health workers were also very distressed by media coverage showing all the significant impact on the pandemic on health workers in other countries. We saw it on TVs and radios. At that time, early February and early March, the risk was very low in New Zealand, but the fear and anxiety was really high among our health workers. Actually, our team also faced a very challenging situation much earlier than the first lockdown. Staff were talking about their anxieties, and some of them said, I'm really scared to see my patient without a face mask. We have a different policy now, but at that time, the health and safety policy was still evolving. And so we had to have very earnest conversations among our staff, and I believed it was really important for our team to have a safe space, talk about their feelings and vulnerability during the uncertain time, and it was really, really crucial. And the dynamic was something we never had before. It was challenging, but it created a stronger connection within our teams, and it also became a powerful tool to cope with the new challenges during the lockdown period. And when we started lockdown, it was absolutely fine, and it just created a more supportive environment for all of us.
Thanks, Grace. I can see in everything that you've, and we've discussed already, some clear components of compassionate leadership. And I'm just recalling the many conversations that I've hosted recently and also during the response to COVID, where we both worked through the problems to be resolved, because there were, as you said, Andy, there was a lot of new things that we actually needed to think about. But also where we created space for teams to reflect on their stories and create their own next steps. And one of those sessions I actually participated on this morning, and I have to say it's both humbling and inspiring to hear the background and experiences of folk and their passion for learning and growth of themselves during this experience. And it speaks a little bit, Grace, to what you've talked about in terms of the conversations you've had with your team and the learnings and growth that you would have worked through with your team. And just wonder if you could reflect just a little bit on about that for us.
Yeah, our team members are normally really hardworking, happy people. And they talked, colleague to colleague, but it was something, exposing their feeling and fear is something very new to them. I think they were brave enough to, express their, emotional feelings. So, and also other staff member also, try to listen to them, and we had a more, not only colleague to colleague conversation, but individual human being and human, and human conversation who are vulnerable, and they realize that they are in the same boat, not in different boat. So it created a stronger sense of belonging, and they realize our colleagues are some people, they need the support, and also, and they were connected very quickly after that challenging conversation. So it created a more strong bond within our teams. So I think it was very powerful moment.
Yeah, and you clearly created a safe space for people to speak.
Yeah, non-judgmental, and also creating confidentiality was really important, and also validating and listening and accepting them as them. Yeah.
Thanks, Grace. Kerri, what is at the heart of being a compassionate leader for you?
I just want to echo what Grace has said about the non-judgmental, because I think that is a really incredible value that compassionate leaders must reflect, because otherwise you can't be present, you can't be listening, and you can't be the best advocate. I think what is at the heart of being a compassionate leader for me is humility and humbleness. I know that in the position that I am in currently, it is easy to get carried away with the fact that you might be in the media more often, you might be quoted, or you might have been wherever. And I think it is about being humble and being grounded. I know that who my family are, I know the skills and attributes that they offer, and I am one of them. So I don't pretend to be above my station, but I do rely on ensuring that my values and principles drive the decisions that I make, so that I can stand firmly on my tūranga waiwai and be confident in who I am. And I'm confident that I haven't breached my own personal values and aspirations. And I'm always mindful of the late Amster Reedy, who took us on a series of workshops, and he said, a leader to him is somebody who adds values, who's unobtrusive, and who inspires. And it really aligns with my worldview, and inspired by leaders who inspire. So Mahatma Gandhi, I think, said, we can't judge a leader by the amount of people that follow, but by the leaders he creates and inspires. And I think being true to who you are, while the world's messy around you, is one of those things that I think drives who I am and the way that I look at things.
Thanks. Just reflecting on what Kerri's talked about, Andy, I'm curious as to what has shaped your growth to lead with compassion.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, look, I think one of the key things for me is actually I was privileged to be involved in the surgical mesh restorative practice work that we did with Victoria University last year. And that was about listening to women who have been harmed by surgical mesh, and it was really instructive to be part of that process. That, you know, as we all know, there's that horrible statistic that if you're a patient in front of a doctor and you start telling your story, your doctor will probably interrupt you in about 30 seconds to ask you the first question. Whereas part of this restorative practice is we just sat and listened. The person who was telling their story had the floor. They were not to be interrupted. They had as long as they wanted. So you sat there and you listened to someone tell their story in the way that they wanted to tell it. You heard what was important to them. You heard the impact of that story. And it was a real eye-opener in the fact that I think as clinicians, we're trained to be problem solvers. And as soon as we hear a symptom or a sign, we jump to a solution. But actually to stand back and truly listen to the story of what is important to that person who is in front of you is not an easy thing to do. And we keep trying to jump in, but it's actually incredibly informative. It's the best way of erasing your biases. It's the best way of truly understanding and trying to develop some empathy for what are the issues that person's putting up with. Now, whether it's a patient, whether it's a staff member, whether it's a member of your team, it's all incredibly important that people feel that they can be heard, and they've not just been heard, but you've actually understood what they've said to you, and they've tried to communicate to you. Now, you may not end up going in the direction they want you to go, but you've done them the dignity of actually hearing and understanding. You may well end up going in that direction, and you've got more chance of going in that direction if you've truly understood what's impactful on that person. But I keep reflecting back to that restorative practice approach, and I keep reminding myself that sometimes the most valuable thing I can do is just shut up and listen to what the person wants to try and tell me.
Thanks, Andy. And I think that speaks to compassionate leadership, which is both enabling teams to learn and to grow, but also creating that collaborative space for conversation, whether that's partly listening to what people are saying or discussing and being part of a discussion. So that's a really nice reflection. Thank you, Andy. I just want to turn to being a compassionate leader is also actually looking after yourself, because we know that if you're healthy, you're able to run healthy teams. So Grace, I'm curious as to how you maintain your energy and restore your reserves.
Yeah, I was the type of person who always tried to push herself to do her best, but I learned that we need to be gentle to ourselves when facing situations that are not entirely under our control. And most of the things in our life, in life aren't. Luckily, I have very good mentors supporting my journey together, and I really appreciate that. And also, I spend more time with my family, and my 2 cats makes me very happy. And I really enjoy my vegetable garden, and they grow by Mother Nature, and it's a really healing activity after busy days.
Thanks, Grace. Andy, what about yourself? How are you compassionate to yourself?
Well, much of the usual thing, very similar to Grace. I've got a wife who's also a clinician, so I've got the huge ability that we can understand each other's conversation. We can say one word and we know exactly what each other's talking about, and can be empathetic to that situation, which is just brilliant, to be in that privileged situation to do that. The other side is obviously trying to make space for a healthy diet, exercise, which, to be honest, I've fallen off track a bit recently, and I'm trying to get back on track. But I think one of the things that I found very important this year is actually redefining success for myself, and the fact that you're in a position where you hear an issue and you want to change the world. Well, I think we should all be aspirational and try and change as much as possible. But to be honest, if we sit back and reflect, well, actually, what power have we got? What can we change? And sometimes it may be that I can't change the world, but maybe the success for me is just getting that conversation on the table on that day, and that's a success. And then someone else might pick it up and take it further forward. So I think it's trying to pull it back to what are realistic signs of success. What can I control and be responsible for? I can't be responsible for what I can't control. I can be aspirational about trying to change that, but I've got to be realistic about what I can control and change. So I think it's that redefining success a bit and trying to be pragmatic around that.
And Kerri, how do you support your well-being?
Yeah, that's really difficult, because I am proud of my whakapapa. I am whakapapa to Tangoio out here in the lovely Hawke's Bay and beach, and so being part of that, connected intrinsically to the sea, the land, and my tipuna is really very much grounds me, and is where I seek and restore and rebalance. I've learnt that over time that one of the most important things for me and how I measure success is how I'm seen or judged in history, how my mokopuna will see and view me, how things and actions that I've done will be judged once I'm no longer on this earth. So I guess my job is to make this best a place as I can for my mokopuna coming behind me. And that's not without its own struggles. I know that you just have to look around and see how Māori are represented in health outcomes, or how Māori are treated with injustice, to see that our battle is long and hard fought. But I'm mindful of Dr. Janice Wen, who also spoke to nurses. And we said to her, what's an inspiring message that you could leave to the student nurses? And she said that every now and again you have to stop and look up at the stars and put into context where you sit and where you fit. And that there's only so much we can do in the time that we're here. So let's do it the best we can. And that fits with where I see that history will judge me, but also history requires me to have a rest, because there's too often you could burn yourself out doing absolutely everything. And one of the things that keep me well is keep me home. And COVID was great because it kept everybody home. And for that moment in time, I think we were all connecting with each other. And I know that in my job and in my role, often that sees me leaving Kahungunu to go down to Wellington to attend meetings. And I've been really privileged to meet with people across the globe and represent nurses internationally. And so what I always say, I like being home and being grounded, where I can kick my fancy shoes off and just feel the ground, because nobody can take away that feeling from me. So being my support and well-being is about being home, being with family, replenishing, and feeling the ground. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So we're just coming towards the end of the webinar, and I'm just want to pick up one point that was made during the conversation, which is as well as being leaders and talking about how we respond to and listen to evolving needs, how we connect with the heart, mind and the soul, how we discuss fear and anxiety in a safe and non-judgmental way. One of the things that also came out is that leaders don't always know what the answers are, but we can intentionally and compassionately ensure that the conversation takes place. But we are also one of us, so we are one of us. And I would just like the panelists to have one last reflection on what being one of us means to them. Thanks. Andy, would you like to go?
Thank you. I suppose being one of us, I suppose it's a privilege. It's, you know, it's hard work, but sometimes the most rewarding stuff you can do. And like, I think being in this position where you actually can hear stories and actually potentially make a difference and lead change, I think it's a real privilege. So yeah, I keep hanging on to that one when I'm sort of having a bit of a frustrating day, which never happens. But yeah, there's the privilege of being in this position.
Thanks, Andy. Kerri.
I think being one of us really reflects that we're all just ordinary people, and sometimes it requires us to do extraordinary things, and it's how we rise to that occasion to do what needs to be done. And that requires, as we've all said, the caring, compassion, the willingness to be present in a conversation, the listening, and then doing something about it, or collaborating to do something about it. But we all try to do our best in such extraordinary situations. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kerri. During my preparation of this webinar, our interpreter taught me how to express compassion in sign language, New Zealand sign language. There's something like that. So my interpretation is that this means we prioritize our emotional well-being. I believe this is something we learned from our deaf community, and we need to be very mindful of it.
Thank you. Wonderful words. Thank you, Grace. So this does bring us, unfortunately, to the end of today's webinar, where we have explored leadership and compassionate leadership. Thank you very much for a really interesting discussion. I've really appreciated the wise words and the great stories from Kerri, Andy and Grace. Just a reminder, in the next few days that we will post this recording on the website Wellbeing for Health, alongside some practical examples and ideas that will help us strengthen our confidence and our ability to lead for wellbeing. We hope that this webinar has given you some new ideas to consider and some tips to support you in your practice in leading for wellbeing. Thank you very much for attending.